So I want to go ahead and clarify something when it comes to split decisions, all right? Say you're arguing with somebody. It's just you and them, all right? Just the two of you, all right? The way they're, engaging in the what's supposed to be discourse seems hostile, volatile. Ultimately, you cannot control their reaction. They seem absolutely unhinged. They seem incapable of being able to form an opinion without actually going ahead and seeming excited in the situation, which keep in mind, people cannot, if you cannot understand the difference between excitement in the sense of seeing the glee of that light bulb turn on the moment that they end up realizing the point to be able to make to fix the problem, actually, in other words, forming a solution, or, you know, them getting passionate, like going ahead, all right, so this is what the basis of the structure of exactly why I'm forming the opinion that I am, as well as the applicable standard, which is, within legal structure, as the basis to go ahead and structure my rebuttal. All right. And ultimately, this very stance, if I'm unwilling to readjust from this exact position, it's because of the factor that, for me personally, the impact of the direction that the final outcome ends up going has more of an impact than you personally have calculated. So while you're basing your response on your calculations, my calculations for me are calculated by me to go ahead and be able to be responsible for my best interest. Which that right there, that is self-advocacy. All right? So a disabled person advocating for themselves and learning the laws that are used to try to disregard ableist pranks, shenanigans, weaponized exclusion, stuff like that, while simultaneously not wanting to be held responsible if they get hit with a lawsuit for, discrimination against a protected class, which being disabled is a protected class. Because you don't want the legal culpability of having to pay for the damages that have been enshrined from the beginning of the stance of the debate. I'm sorry that you could not be any more risk adverse than if you were only willing to put money towards a sure thing that is going to guarantee to stay to be a sure thing. And at that point, I apologize for your fear of risk. And, ultimately, when it comes to risk assessment, the gauge is a little wonky. What you're really going to want to aim for is low risk, high reward. All right? That right there, that's the dream. Low risk, high reward. By the way, I understand how fundamentally basic that sounds, but it was pretty fundamentally basic the first time, and the second, I've literally been going ahead and explaining the way that applies since fucking elementary school. But you know who usually ends up complaining about the application and definition of accountability. The people that want to complain because they were being too heavy-handed and were told they needed to stop, or else they would be held accountable. And behold the level of force that you were attempting to apply, while at the same time not establishing the legal grounds or basis on which made you presume, and be bold enough to come to the presumption and have the assumption that you had the right to go ahead and act in which way. Because ultimately, if you don't like what the response is going to be, don't take the risk putting it out there. And if you do put it out there, go ahead and reverse course if you're wrong. If what made you come to understand that you were wrong was you took the time to learn and educate yourself on the topic, good! You're understanding what started this debate. Education, learning, the importance of it, the detriment of the lack of it. I don't know what point in this debate that everyone else has gone and engaged in. But the point that I started in this debate, while having to relentlessly and endlessly debate this, started at 14 years old. Here I am 20 years later. And the funny thing is, what started the frustrations was the factor of somebody being bold enough to think that an unconscionable contract of telling me that you want me to shut up forever would be enforceable, while simultaneously trying to get that to be legally enforceable in the United States of America, where the Constitution, the guidelines of the law, ends up going ahead and establishing the First Amendment right: freedom of speech, freedom of journalism. Now, ultimately, if somebody goes and, say, for example, in a journalistic manner, I go ahead and I publish something, I believe it to be factual, all right? If somebody goes and presents to me, whether under guise of anonymity or not, ends up going ahead and presenting to me the resources to go ahead and determine how wrong my perception of things is, then ultimately, part of the job is when you're wrong, you got to admit it, you got to correct it. If you don't correct it, ultimately not recanting those statements, that's equivalent to the defamation of character, So, ultimately, that meets that threshold. If you don't want to meet that threshold, you got to apologize. If you don't want to apologize, or you say you'll never apologize, or it'll be a cold day in hell when you apologize, then understand, if you want to go ahead and make that to be your legal position, and you want to make a literal fucking court date and a literal trial, and try to argue that you being right is more important than the structure of the resources used to come to the conclusion of legality. Ultimately, you even want to go ahead and base your decision on the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers said you don't get to tell me to shut up. If anything, I do believe one of them in mid-conflict ended up saying, I may not respect your opinion, but I will fight to the death your right to have it. Alright? That very expression ended up going ahead and being pretty much the spirit and one of the disc of the backbones of the entire structure of national defense. The branches of military, Marines, Army, National Guard. Same moral guidelines, different branches. Better, worse, supposed to be co-equal. No one ever said harmoniously, just co-equal.